Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading from the One-Year Bible, and we examine some questions that extend our learning from the sermon on Sunday. Today I'm joined by Rivenbark and Alyssa Bream, and we're looking at a passage from Psalm 31 through 12. It says, "I will exalt you, Lord, for you rescued me. You refused to let my enemies triumph over me. O Lord my God, I cried to you for help, and you restored my health. You brought me up from the grave. O Lord, you kept me from falling into the pit of death. Sing to the Lord, all you godly ones. Praise his holy name." So our theme this month is relationships, and we're looking at this passage today, which is part of our reading. So how does this passage relate to relationships?
I think it's got a lot to say. David starts out and he uses these terms like the godly ones, join me in praising. He recognizes that he already has some commonalities with other people, which are important for relationship building. There's a collective community already built in, and that's a great starting point. And one of the things I appreciate about David, he didn't just stop there. He didn't talk about just his triumphs and his, and all the things that he accomplished, but he was open and honest and transparent and vulnerable about the bad stuff and the ugly stuff too. And that's a great lesson to learn, that relationships are developed not just when we have things in common. That's a great starting point. But when we're honest and authentic with people, I think it leads to real relationship. And it brings up this idea about how our own witness, our personal testimony, can strengthen relationships and actually develop strong relationships in our life.
Yeah, I think sometimes we think of testimonies only as something that maybe somebody who isn't saved will hear and want to find Jesus through or help them through a hard time. But really, sharing your testimony is an important part of building a friendship with somebody and building a relationship. And there are 3 different principles, I think, that we can learn about how our testimony can impact relationships. When we share our stories, we communicate the hope that we found in our own struggle, and that will deepen the bond that we have with a person. When we share our stories, we're vulnerable, and that builds trust. Anytime that you're authentic with somebody, it's going to build a stronger relationship. Inauthenticity, is that a word? That sounded really weird.
Yeah.
Being inauthentic is like the bane of the younger generation, especially. If you are seen as inauthentic in what you're saying or doing, it's like, okay, I don't trust you anymore. You can just stay over there. I don't need any relationship with you. And when we tell our stories to others, we're inviting them to rejoice over God's deliverance in our life. And that joy, there's nothing stronger than joy to build a community. Like whenever you see a sports team celebrating in their community, like they're all together and it brings the community together. So when you're rejoicing with somebody else about their triumph that they've had, or you're bringing somebody in to rejoice about yours, it just strengthens that relationship and it brings unity, and that's important to relationships.
If that's a critical piece of strengthening relationships, what stops people from telling their personal testimony to others or their personal story?
Fear, shame, embarrassment. In the church community, I think there's even a greater risk, or at least we have that perception, that if we're authentic and tell all of our story, that people are going to judge us or criticize us or even alienate us, because they don't want to be identified with us if they know some of those parts about us.
In sharing parts of my testimony, it's like feeling foolish about it. Maybe I'm not scared, but like, man, I was stuck in that for so long. That was really stupid. And so I don't want to share maybe parts of it. I think the sin part isn't really what's scary, but the shame. And that has been something that I have been hearing over and over again in different things I've been reading and hearing, that Jesus came not only to save us from sin, but from shame. And I think if we're not over that shame part, then we're not fully healed from that relationship, or from that. We're talking about so much about relationships, that injury or that issue that we had in our life. The thing when I was younger that kind of stopped me from sharing my testimony would be that I didn't think I had a good testimony. Because I was raised in church, I followed the rules. I was not like the foolish young man wandering the streets at night. And so I think that stopped me for a while. And I just heard somebody say this just a couple days ago, and it struck a chord with that. It says, if you don't think you have a good testimony, you don't grasp the full gospel. You don't grasp just how much you needed Jesus. So I think there's just so many things. I mean, from my perspective, being camera shy, because a lot of times when I'm asking people for testimonies, it's for a video, and they're like, I don't want to tell that in front of a camera. And it's just, people telling their stories is important.
My observation over the years that hinders, at least the number one thing, is they have not fully healed from whatever it is that that would be beneficial for them to talk about. They can't talk about it because
it's too much of a trigger. It's too problematic.
It's too challenging for them. All of the things, the shame, the embarrassment, the things y'all talked about. The example that I would give, so I was further along probably than, I know I was much further along than Barbara was to talk about my story and where I'd come from. And the book I wrote, I think it came out in 2017, if I remember right, about, my story. And I intentionally left names of people out, including my first wife's name, mostly for legal reasons, because I didn't go ask permission to tell anything about them. So I left it blank. And there were lots of things I didn't say about other people that I could have that would have changed that story. But I remember when my kids got a hard copy of the book, a hardback copy of the book first. It never was sold in hardback. They got a hardback copy. And my first wife saw a copy of it. She was at Lauren's house and she picked it up and started reading it, and she flipped a wig. I don't want people knowing these things about me and blah blah. And she was hot. And but she never said anything to me about it. I think she was headed in that direction. But all of this happened in a matter of just a few weeks. She doesn't live here. We get along fine, so I don't think I'm telling anything that's top secret. But she doesn't live here in Edenton, but she was back visiting sometime after that, and had taken one of the grandkids to the pediatrician. And while she was in there, somebody from the church was in there, and the lady was saying to her how awesome that she thought it was that we could talk about our story, and how helpful it was to people. And it changed her tune completely about, sharing it. She's different than I am. She's made up different than I am about that. But I can't speak to the fully healed, how she was dealing with it, those kind of things. I do know that her perception that people would think badly of her, if this information is out there, would reflect on, and how it would reflect on her. And what she missed was the fact that sometimes telling those things is extremely helpful to people, but you first have to settle that in your own heart, right? That, okay, if you don't receive it, I'm sorry, right? But it's not going to make me feel ashamed. I'm not going to go back and relive it because you don't receive it well. And so I think sometimes people they're not healed from it, and they don't see how it could help somebody. And so they're short-sighted on that. So do you have any thoughts about how we can incorporate sharing testimonies in church community better?
Well, we've been talking a lot about relationships, about communication, one-on-one. When you get to know somebody, I think you develop a trust level where, when it's appropriate, you can share more of that story. Um, Life groups we talk about quite a bit in the church community. I think that's a great area because over time, again, you get to know those people, relationships develop, and you feel a safe place to be able to share. And so, yeah, there's a multitude of ways that we can. We have a big focus here on trying to tell more stories, even through video, because that has the ability to reach a lot of people.
At times we've done better, and at times we haven't made it a priority to video and show testimonies, just because of the way the church seasons kind of go. Right now, I think we are doing a fairly good job of trying to get some stories out there, but I do think that people need to look beyond that Sunday morning for sharing, and we need to help people find other ways. Like, life group is the perfect place. I am sure that in life groups, that's where I have learned a lot about people that I was in life group with, where, a question comes up and you share a little bit of your story.
Mhm.
It's not like a testimony needs to be an hour-long diatribe about every single moment that's happened in your life, because that most of the time is not going to be helpful. But it's helpful if you have a question about maybe healing a relationship, and you can say, hey, I went through this with my sibling, with my spouse, with my parent, and this is how we got through it. And then, so I think you need to think of it not in sharing your whole story necessarily, but just when an opportunity comes up to share a part of your story, be willing and honest.
I think we all have opportunities, whether it's social media, whatever. I think those things strengthen community. I read what I mentioned in the last couple of days, the book that I'm finishing up by called The Second Mountain by David Brooks. I was trying to think of his name. Anyway, the book is closing now. I'm on the last 10 or 12 pages, but the last piece of it talks about relationships, and he uses the thick and thin relationships, and he talks about the markers of thick relationships, and he even talks about some institutions like the Marine Corps and the University of Chicago and Morehead College, where the relationships are thicker than normal, right? But he talks about some things that they impose on people. And one of the things is, like, they sing together, they dance together, right? And the verse that I read said, "Sing to the Lord, all you godly ones." There is commonality when we, Alyssa, you've talked about how they repeat the story of coming out of Egypt a lot of times in the New Testament. Psalms, Proverbs, lots of the books repeat the story over and over again. It becomes this common theme that, it becomes ingrained in who you are. And sometimes it's just important for us to tell the story of salvation. Your testimony isn't, I was a drug addict and, now I'm free from addiction. But the repetition of the deliverance from sin and being set free is important for us to do. And we all have a platform now. Everybody's got an opportunity. They can talk about it wherever they want to. So can you tell maybe y'all haven't experienced a time when you got a sense of hope, when somebody shared their own personal story and how it impacted you?
I can think of many through the years, but I'll mention 3 categories where I have benefited from other people's story specifically. That brought hope and encouragement in the area of marriage relationships, finances, and healing, where I've listened to other people's story at critical times where it brought great inspiration, hope in those times.
Yeah, I find right now that a lot of the testimonies that I hear that resonate with me are ones that can hold 2 things true at the same time, that the time was really hard, but God was still there. And I think that's an important thing, that when we're telling our testimony, we don't minimize the pain or say, God made it all better. And now, like, you can still hold two things true at the same time. The testimony that came to mind was one I've watched when somebody, I believe it was a journalist that met Hugh Hefner and had a chance to witness to Hugh Hefner. And that was just like the courage that it took, but like how God arranged that, and like to deliver like this message of hope to Hugh Hefner, like that's like insane. And I think that hearing stories of like people taking that courage, but God arranging things, is just really powerful.
I think I may have talked about this on this podcast before. I don't know. The one that came to my mind was the night that I got ordained here at the church. They set us down front. People were they prayed over us, but people were coming by and speaking to us. And I remember just how overwhelmed with emotion that I was because of a second chance, just all of the things that I had not, I didn't know if they would ever happen again. And this lady and her husband came by, and she put her head down between Barbara and I, and all she said at that moment was, she said, "Keep your head up. God's going to use you. We've all been in the ditch at some point." That's all she said. Later, she would tell me the story about her and her husband had separated, and they were our friends. Like, I had no idea, and how they had separated, didn't think they were going to make it, and they figured it out, and still married, still come to church here, and but I just remembered how encouraged I was, right? That the one thing she felt like she needed to tell me in that moment was, we've all been in the ditch. You're not by yourself. And I think that offers encouragement to people, because one of the things the enemy does is he tries to isolate us and make us believe you're the only ones that have ever been there, done that, had that happen to us. And other people's stories encourage us in that. So. Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue a conversation around our daily Bible reading from the One Year Bible.